Hi, I'm Debbie Shaw, and this is my latest book. It's called So Baby, and it's full of 20 inspirational projects for the nursery. So no baby clothes in this one. It's all about the nappy stackers, laundry bins. There's a patchwork cushion cover. We've got quilting, some very, very simple ideas like little bandana bibs and headbands, all the way through to covering your own Moses basket. There's a bag that can go on the back of your pushchair, and there's loads of pockets in this, so it's really practical. Pockets on the front, pocket on the back, pockets on the side, and it's got pockets on the inside as well. Another handy, simple project may be just burp cloths, and of course you can keep things like your disposable nappies and wipes inside here as well, so that's practical if you're out and about and on the go. There's a sleeping bag which is designed to go in a pushchair, so this unzips down the side, and there are button holes in the back that you can measure your pushchair and thread the straps through, and that can be used in the car seat as well, or of course you can leave those off and it's just a sleeping bag. Things for little ones to play with, to excite them with lots of different textures and noises, with play mats, and of course there's my balloon mobile to decorate your room with. And in this video I'm going to show you how to make this chap and how to make him slightly larger. Here we go. So this is my balloon mobile, and there's the little dog hanging off the balloon strings, which you can make, down you go, independently if you just wanted to make the little dog toy on its own. But I've got a tip for you on how to make this just slightly bigger. So if you just wanted to make the toy on its own, or if you wanted to make the balloon mobile and make the balloons bigger as well, this is how you can make them ½ an inch bigger without having to worry about getting the pattern resized. Because when you cut your pattern out, and you can photocopy that if you wanted to, so you're not cutting into the pattern in your book, draw around the outside of the pattern onto your fabric, and you'll need 2 pieces of fabric for each piece and folded right sides together, and then we're going to sew around the outline before we cut it out, and that's actually going to add ½ inch to the seam allowance, which means that your little dog is going to be ½ an inch bigger, which is actually quite a lot bigger on something of this size. So I've drawn the leg, the arm and the ear. I've already cut one out and finished those already. And there's the body. Now in each one of the pieces you're going to need to leave a turning gap. Always try and leave a turning gap on a straight side, because trying to hand sew together any of these curved sides could look rather messy unless you've got very, very good small hand stitching. So straight's probably easier. And around the back here is probably going to be the best place to put that seam, because it's out of the way, it's on the back. Now I'm using a shorter stitch on my sewing machine, so I've gone down to number 2, and I'm using a quilting foot on my machine purely because it's easy to work out where the ½ inch seam allowance is. So I'm going to lock the stitches either end. If you don't have a fixed stitch on your sewing machine, then just back stitch a couple of stitches, and I'm simply following around the line that I've traced from the pattern. Now if you need to stop with the needle down, and then your stitch line will carry on, and just take your time going around the curves, because the smoother this stitch line is, the smoother the seam's going to be when you finish your dog. Now as my mobile isn't a toy, I wasn't too worried about using buttons and things like that, but if you are going to give this as a toy to a little one, then use safety eyes or embroider the eyes and nose on so there isn't anything that can be pulled away. Just curving around the nose, up to the point, then around the rest of the head. So it is worth taking your time with this, just making sure that you get that really smooth stitch line. If you do have any kind of facility at home where you can scan in the pattern and enlarge or reduce them, you can make this as big or as small as you like. So maybe have a whole family of little pups in all different sizes. Right, just coming back to the hole at the back. Ooh. And again, don't leave that too small, because we're going to need to put some stuffing in there. Right, then we're going to cut this out. With my 1/4 inch seam allowance, so this is how your pattern's getting bigger. A little tip for you, when I'm coming up to the opening, I'm just going a little bit wider with the seam allowance. Just over that area where the opening is. And that's so that when I come to hand sew the opening closed, I've got a little bit more fabric to work with. Now, just like with any pattern, any of the curves here, we're going to snip into those curves on the inside of the nose here, up to the stitches but not through the stitches, and around the back of the neck, and that's going to help your seams sit flatter. And then we'll turn this the right side out. Give it a press if you've got any kind of fabric that is that creases very easily. So just push all those extremities out. There's the little nose, there's the tummy. And then we'll stuff. Now I'm using a really soft toy filler. If it's a toy, it's worth investing in something that may be a little bit more expensive because it makes it so much softer. If this is just going to be an ornament, then it doesn't really matter quite so much. And just use small amounts at a time, particularly when it comes to the arms and the legs. You may find that using something like tweezers is a help, but small amounts means that it's not going to go clumpy. So particularly with the arms and the legs, if you put a big bunch of toy filler in there, you'll just have a big bunch of toy filler. It won't feel very nice. And then just keep stuffing until it's full. Now, I've deliberately put the ears on afterwards because I like to know that they're in exactly the right position. The more seasoned sewers out there may be able to put those on before you sew these two pieces together. Okay, just keep pushing. If you do have something like a knitting needle, particularly for the finer bits or the arms and legs, then that could be useful. And you may even find that the large end of a knitting needle would help, just to push those in. So you can see them starting to take shape now. So we'll just carry on and do the body. The legs and the arms you're going to make up in just the same way, and the ears, of course, don't have any stuffing in them. So there's my well-stuffed body. I'm just going to sew the opening closed down the back. Now this again is entirely up to you. If you're confident enough to do a very small ladder stitch, that's going to be the most invisible way of sewing. But I'm just going to do a very small over edge stitch to close that opening because it's quicker and it's easier. And if I can do those stitches small enough, you're barely going to see them. So I'm going to just literally go from one side of the opening to the other, catching a couple of threads of the fabric as I do so, so not too big a stitch, and then literally sew over and over and over, pulling every few stitches to close the opening until I get to the end. And again, this is an easy way of doing this if your hand stitching isn't particularly accurate, because this is going to be right down the back of the toy, so it's in the most invisible place. So where the fabric's actually creased over, that's where I'm going to put that tiny, tiny stitch. The smaller the stitch, the stronger the seam's going to be, and the more invisible those stitches will be as well. And then we're going to do the same with the arms and the legs, just sewing up in just the same way. It's up to you with the stuffing whether you want to make him or her very compactly stuffed, so he's quite a full portly little chap. Or if you don't put quite so much stuffing in there, then he's going to be a little bit floppy, which on the larger ones is actually quite a nice finish. Okay, I'm just going up to the end of the little gap. So just knot off my thread and just make sure I tie a really strong knot in here so that doesn't come undone. The easiest way to do that is to take your needle through the fabric, wrap your thread around the end of it twice like a little French knot and pull that tight, and that isn't going to come undone. So there we go, that's all neatly finished. Now I have been busy and I've made up the legs in just the same way, and I've made up the arms, so they've all got these little tiny seams down the back, as you can see there. And with the ear, no stuffing in the ear, remember. I've already made one ear up, that's going to go on there. And here's the second ear. I'm just going to make sure that I pleat that the opposite way to I did the first one. So I've got one pleat facing inwards and one pleat facing outwards. And I'll just keep a pin in there for now. With the ears, as it says in your instructions, fold the raw edge inwards, so I didn't sew across the top, I just sewed around the bottom side. And if you want to top stitch around there to make that a little bit neater, then of course you can do. Now this is going to go on the side of the head. Remember to leave yourself enough room for the eye. So just pin that into the side of the head. And the same with the other one, and you can tell by looking over the top that it's in the same position on either side. Then we'll take our needle and thread and again just do a little over edge stitch. So hide the knot underneath the ear and then make a tiny stitch into the head and then back out to the ear all the way across, and just try and catch through both layers of the ear fabric as you do that. What I also like to do, this is entirely up to you, but this is something that I get into a habit of, is opening up the ear and putting a little drizzle of really strong fabric glue underneath the stitches, just in case any of my grandchildren happen to get hold of it and decide that the ears would be a good thing to pull off. So I want to make that as unlikely as possible. And again a nice strong knot on the end. I'll do the other ear in just a second. Right, for the arms and the legs, if you do a lot of these toys, it's worth investing in one of these. It's the kind of needle that's used for doll making and is very long, and this isn't the longest that you can buy. The reason being that you can now take the needle, oops, let me get, all the way through the body and out to the other side. If you don't have a doll needle and you're only planning on doing this one project, you just use the longest needle that you have in your sewing box. And I'm using embroidery thread on here purely because that's the strongest thread that I've got. So thread the leg onto the top of here, and that's going to be hinged, and then go straight back through and back out to where you came from. And then the second leg goes on here, and just make sure that they're sitting evenly either side of the body. And then we're going to pull that tight, so we've got a little bit of an indentation either side. And then on the end of your very long needle, thread your button or buttons. back through again, straight out to the other side. Pull that nice and tight. And the button goes on. Down you go. And back through again. And keep going. Let's see what I'm doing. Backwards and forwards as many times as you like to give a really strong so a really strong join. I'm just trying to come back up through that button again, which is avoiding my needle. Got you. Pull that tight. And then when we're going to finish, I'm going to go back into the needle, come out underneath the leg. I don't need that big long needle anymore now. Again, pull that tight, wrap it around the leg a few times, and then tie a knot at the back of the leg. So you've still got a little bit of movement here. We can tie a double knot if we want that to be really, really secure. So just go around again, knot, and then we'll trim that back. There we go. So now we do just the same technique with the arms, with the buttons on the side again. I'll sew that second ear on, and then we'll look at the face. There we are, then we've got the arms and the legs all sewn on, so the only thing that we need to do now is to put the eyes and nose and mouth on. So I'm going to draw these on with an erasable ink pen, just where I think they're going to look good. So one eye there, and just measuring that by eye to make sure that that's the same on either side. And then we'll have a little nose in a triangle shape. This is a friction pen, which is heat erasable. I'm not too worried about what type of pen you use because you're going to embroider over the top. But down here, and then we'll have a little smiley mouth either side like that. If you want to put some little French knots on for whiskers, or you know, on the red checked one, I just put buttons on there for eyes. I didn't actually put a nose and a mouth, so that's up to you. Okay, now for the eyes I'm just going to do little French knots, and because I don't want to see the knot in my fabric, in my thread, I'm going to take it somewhere out of the way and put it into the side of the head here, and then bring it out through the eye. And then when I pull that embroidery thread into the head, that disappears. This is loose, so I need to make my little knot without pulling the thread any further. So take the needle in and out, just a couple of threads of the fabric along, and then wrap your yarn around twice, and then pull that all through. Try not to get all of this thread twisted as you do that. And when it comes to underneath where my finger is, there should be a perfect little knot. And then we're going to go back in just underneath that knot and take the needle out through the opposite eye. And to give a little bit of character to the dog, if you just pull that slightly, just like with the buttons on the arms and legs, it gives a little bit of an indentation, it gives shape to the face. So I'm holding the head while I'm doing that, and another little French knot, so in and out with the needle, wrap that around twice and pull it through. If you wanted to make a smaller eye, use less thread, and if you want a larger eye, use a thicker thread. Don't be tempted to just keep winding and winding and winding, because you'll just end up with a cone shape to the eye. I like these tiny little dots for eyes. I think they actually add character. You could put buttons on there if you wish. Now I'm taking the needle back through the head and out through the corner of the nose. and then I'm going to satin stitch across that triangle shape that I made. So into the opposite corner and literally sew over, with the second thread quite close to the first so I don't see the fabric behind there. And as I'm following the lines of the triangle, I'm bringing that stitch in. I've got a large-eyed needle with a very thick thread, so it is going to be a bit of an effort to pull that through. So just keep getting narrower and narrower until we get to the point. A couple more stitches and that's all filled in. One more. Tiny stitch right at the bottom of the triangle. And then I'm going to back stitch the rest of the nose and the mouth. So just quite small stitches, going backwards into the stitch that I did before, underneath, and come out around about 1/8 of an inch in front. So back into the previous stitch and out again in front. Just got a loop there. That's it. Back again. And now I'm going to turn the needle around so I'm following the line of the mouth. And this is quite subtle because I'm using grey on grey. If you really want this to stand out, no matter what colour you're embroidering onto, use a black thread. Okay, so I've just got the other half of the mouth to finish. Like so. Then I'm going to tie a tiny knot at the end of the mouth there. And just like I did initially, I'm taking the needle into the mouth, out somewhere else on the side of the head, pull that a little bit tight, snip the thread, and the end disappears into the head. And there it is finished. So as you can see, by using that technique, by sewing around the outline and then cutting 1/4 of an inch bigger, you actually end up with your little dog about 1/2 an inch bigger than the one for your pattern.